Hello everyone, welcome to my channel. In this video, I'm going to show you how I build my turned leg tables from start to finish. So let's get into it. The first thing that I like to do is draw out everything that I need to do, measurements, color, you name it. That way, moving through the project, it just makes things a lot easier because I have it on paper. The first step in making these turned leg tables, you need to buy the legs. I get mine online and I will link that in the description below for you, but I get 2x4s and just cut them to length. A good rule of thumb for knowing this measurement is the table legs are 5-inch blocks on the top. So that's 10 inches. And then I like to leave an inch overhang on the tabletop. So that right there is 12 inches, a foot exactly. So if you want your tabletop, for instance, this one is going to wind up being 10 feet long, I cut those apron pieces at 9 feet. Same thing for the width. There was 2.5 feet, I believe, because my total width was going to be 3.5 feet. Don't forget to give your little shop puppy some loving if you have any. Once you have all of your 2x4s cut to length, then you're gonna want to drill pocket hole screw holes into them on both sides using your Kreg jig, which is what I have, or there are other pocket hole jigs out there you can use. Kreg is just kinda the OG. This table was one of my longer tables that I've ever done, so I'm really glad that I had tall ceilings in my shop, but if you are gonna be doing a long table like this, you may need to go outside of your garage or in the driveway, which is what I used to do before I had my shop, to get these in your jig properly to get those pocket holes drilled. Once you have your pocket holes drilled in all 4 of your apron pieces out of the 2x4s, then you want to make sure you sand everything nice and smooth. If you have any 2x4s that have knots or imperfections in them, this is a good time to go ahead and wood fill those and sand them down, because sanding them now is going to be a lot easier than sanding them once the table base is built. When connecting the 2x4s to the legs, I like to inset the apron piece about 1/2 inch. That way it just gives it a little extra dimension and detail to make it look more polished and finished whenever you're done, versus butting it up right to the edge of that leg. And when you do this, like I said, it just adds a little bit extra detail to it. In this video, you'll see me using the blue Kreg pocket hole screws. I prefer those a little bit more. They're the exterior screws, so you'll see blue screws and you'll see silver screws. The silver screws are interior. The blue screws have been coated, and so they're rated for exterior use. To me, they just have better grip on them because of this coating, so that's just what I use for all of my projects. Plus, it's already protected against anything that the weather can throw at it, so I know it'll be fine indoors. But I like to use 2.5 inch pocket hole screws with the coarse bit, because these are just pine table legs and the pine aprons, which is more than enough. And then I also use my Titebond Ultimate wood glue. So Titebond has 3 different types of, well, they have a bunch more than 3, but they have the original, they have type 2, and they have type 3, and they have some other ones out there as well, but those are the 3 most common. I like type 3, the green label, because it cures a lot quicker, and it's more of like a brown color versus the other 2 are that like really yellow color. But you want to coat the entire end of that 2x4 before attaching it to that leg. When attaching the base together, I like to start off by attaching just the end pieces first, since they are the shortest pieces. That way I have 2 ends built, and then after I get both of those ends built, then I will go over to the floor and put them on the floor, and then that's when I will attach the long pieces. So for the long apron pieces, you may need some help. I almost dropped one here. But you want to use lots of wood glue and those 2.5 inch pocket hole screws, making sure it is staying level with that 1/2 inch inset mark that you made. I do both of the long pieces, and then I will stand it up and then connect it to the other end to get your basic frame of your table base. Now, once you have your frame done, you're gonna need to add some bracing, especially for a table this size, 10 feet long. You really want to make sure that it's going to be sturdy throughout the span of its life, which should be like generations. The first type of bracing we're going to start with is going to be the corner bracing. This is the easiest way to really stiffen up those legs. It's just 45-degree cuts. What I like to do is I will make a 45-degree cut. I will hold it up to the table base and mark where I need to make that other 45-degree cut. I will make that cut, and then I get 4 of those pieces, all of the same size. To attach the corner bracing, all I do is get those same 2.5-inch pocket hole screws and the same Titebond 3 wood glue, and I make sure wood glue is lathered on both ends. I secure it, and then I have 2 screws in each side that hold it to the apron. Once you have all 4 of the corner bracings complete, next is going to be adding some cross bracing through the center of the table. Since this is such a long table, I'm going to be adding 3 pieces, which will break it into 4 sections, essentially. If you're going with like a 7-foot or an 8-foot table, you may only need 2 of these pieces, but for this long of a table, I like to just add a few more supports in there. The way I do this is I make the first mark in the direct middle of the table, and I put a board there. I use my handy dandy self-centering tape measure to make this measurement because your girl does not like math. When I measure the table, the bottom of my measurement is going to tell me what the half measurement is, which is like the most amazing thing ever. Again, I will have all of this stuff linked in the description for you, but I make the the half of the table, and then once I have that, then I will mark half between there to get 4 even sections. And once I have all of those measurements marked out, so you'll have the center, and then you'll have the center of both halves. Once I have all of those marked out, I will then cut 3 pieces to size, drill pocket holes into the ends of those, and then attach to the aprons using the same 2.5-inch pocket hole screws and wood glue. And that completes your table base. The only thing left to do is paint, but we're not going to do that just yet. The next step is going to be building the top. The top for this table I'm using ash wood, which is very similar to oak, but it is a lot denser. Unfortunately, it's not going to be available that much longer because there's like an insect, the emerald something insect, that is eradicating the ash trees. So if you want to get this same look, you can also use red oak. To start, since these boards are so long, I could use my jointer, but I'm opting to use my track saw to get one edge perfectly straight. That way I don't have to throw my back out trying to get it done on the jointer. For smaller boards, I do like to use my jointer though. It does get that nice, perfect finish. After I use the track saw to cut the edge of each of these boards, I flip that board over and then I run it through my table saw. This way it gets the other edge perfectly cut to the width that I need. So some of the boards had to be cut to 9 inches, some of them had to be cut to 8.5 inches. That way the board is the perfect width throughout the entire board and it's not wonky. After all of the boards have been milled and are square, next is going to be getting them into the clamps. Some people like to use, so I have a Festool Domino. You can use dowels. There's a bunch of different ways you can glue up a top. For me, I just like to glue it up. The Domino and dowels, those are all for alignment. They don't do anything structurally. The glue is going to be what holds your tabletop together. A glued joint is actually so much stronger than the wood itself. So if you were to break a top, the wood would split before that joint splits. So I like to lay all of my boards out and kind of arrange them how I think they look best, because the grain on one board might contrast the grain on another board too much, and I want to make sure I separate those out. So you see me here, I like to kind of eyeball and put the boards in the order I want before I glue them up. And once I have all of the boards in the order that I want, I glue them up and then I clamp them all together. I prefer Bessie's pipe clamps, the 3/4 inch pipe clamps. They are the most sturdy clamps that I have found. They have a bunch of other types of clamps, but the pipe clamps are my favorite. And I use the little clamps just to hold the ends together from sliding around. And this is what it should look like once you get it all in the clamps. So while the top is drying in the clamps, which I usually like to let that do at least overnight, I went ahead and painted the table base. For this table base, I'm using Sherwin-Williams Alabaster White paint. It is a very popular choice among the whites. I think Alabaster, Extra White, and Pure White are the top 3 whites that clients of mine ask for. So the week that I built this table, it was raining and it was just miserable. So that's why you see me painting in the shop. And I like to use my HomeRite Super Finish Max paint sprayer. I get so much hate for this paint sprayer, but it literally does such a good job and it's so affordable. I think it's like $100. I have 4 of them, I believe. I have one for white paint, one for black paint, one for stain, and one for clear coating. When I paint the base, I like to do really thin layers and then I will sand in between each layer, wipe off any of the dust, and then apply the next layer. This gives the most uniform finish in my opinion, especially when using this paint sprayer. There's other paint sprayers that you could spend hundreds on, but for what I do, I've found that this has been more than enough and it's so easy to clean because I only use water-based products except for my stains. I do use oil-based for my stains, but 99% of the time I'm applying my stain by hand, so I don't have to worry about that. But I do like this sprayer because it's so easy to clean, it's affordable, and it gets the job done. So the next day I go out to the shop and I take the top out of the clamps. It has been more than enough time to completely cure. That Titebond 3 only takes like 45 minutes to set. But for a tabletop this size and this weight especially, I want to give it ample time to cure. So doing it right before bed is the best scenario because it can just sit overnight and it is nice and cured by the morning. Now the only downside to being a one-woman shop is moving the furniture as I'm building it. This top weighed, I believe it was like 230 or 250 pounds. Who needs, you know, CrossFit or the gym when you're a woodworker? So as you can see here, I got my deadlifts in for the day and I picked the table up and put it on some sawhorses to make it a little bit easier to do the finish work. But because your girl is professional, I needed to flip the top to finish the underside. So that was another struggle because again, this top was heavy. It was very heavy and it's just so big and awkward. It seems even heavier than it actually is. So it felt like it was like 500 pounds, but I flipped it and then I got to sanding the underside because we want to sand, stain, and seal the underside. That way the entire top is finished the same and you don't have to worry about uneven moisture content or expansion and contraction down the road. When I sand, I like to use my Mirka sander attached to my Festool dust extractor. These are really expensive tools, so if you're just starting out, I would say I think I started off with the DeWalt 5-inch orbital sander, and it has a dust attachment that you can attach a shop vac to, which will get similar results. The Mirka is just a lot more powerful of a sander. So because this is what I do full time, that's why I invested in that. After I got the whole underside completely sanded smooth, all of the glue joints clean, then I got my track saw again and my very big square to make sure that the edge was nice and square before I cut it, because we want everything to be square. Start square, end square. This tabletop is 10 feet long, so what I do is I line up one edge and I just cut off a very minimal amount. Whenever I cut the boards initially, I always like to leave like 1.5 inches to allow me to do this step and get the exact measurement, length measurement that I need when it comes time to cut the ends. And same thing here, you'll see me, I'm using a Festool track saw, which is a very expensive track saw. However, Craig Jig actually makes a track saw, DeWalt makes a track saw, Makita, pretty much every brand now makes track saws. So it's definitely a good tool to have if you plan on doing any type of furniture DIY. And if you don't have a table saw, it's also a great addition to the shop. Now, once the underside is completely sanded, stained, and clear coated, I like to flip it over and then do the exact same to the top. However, the top, I like to add a chamfer bit. This, again, just like when we insetted that apron piece onto that table leg, gives it just that little extra detail to really make it look professional. After doing a rough sand and chamfering all of the edges, if there's any knots or imperfections in the wood, you want to make sure those are filled in before you do the finish sanding. So here I like to use my Starbond Adhesives CA glue with the accelerator because it dries pretty much instantly. And for a knot like this, you want to do layers. That way you know it's nice and solid. If you just filled the entire knot up and then sprayed it with the accelerator, only the top would dry and it would still be liquid underneath. And then you'll run into problems down the road when you get to staining and whatnot because it won't be fully cured. So if you're doing a large knot like this one, fill it a little bit and then accelerator, a little bit, accelerator until you get all the way to the top, and then that way you know it's nice and pure. This tabletop didn't really have hardly any perfections. I think it had 2 knots in the top, and then there was just a bunch of little itty bitty pinholes here and there that I made sure to fill in with that Starbond and let it cure for a couple minutes. The accelerator dries it pretty fast, but I usually like to wait at least 5 to 10 minutes before sanding. Then once all of that Starbond is nice and hard, I like to go in with the next grit sandpaper. So I started with 60 grit. Now I am up to 80 grit. Eventually, I will get all the way up to 220. So I like to go 60, 80, 100, 120, 150, 180, 220. And keep in mind, when you're sanding, less pressure is more. A lot of people get the notion that they need to really press down to sand. That's just bogging down the motor on your sander and it's not giving you the best results. So let the sander do the work. That's what you'll probably hear me say in other videos. Let the tool do the job it was meant to do. When you're sanding, it may look like or feel like you're not getting anywhere, but I assure you, letting the sander sand is going to get you a lot further than pressing down, because then you're gonna have to get a new sander and you're not gonna get the results you like. And now the fun part. Once I get all the way up to 220, I sand it down, I wipe everything down with a tack cloth, and then you get to staining. So a lot of people will use a pre-stain. I don't like to do that. I find if you stain with the grain, you still get an even finish. So here you see I'm using Jacobine by Minwax. I really, really like this color. It is like a dark, warm brown, and on this Asha, it really pops. After I apply the stain, I immediately wipe off any excess. If you don't wipe off, it will be thicker and leave a sticky residue, and then you could eventually wipe it and it will just completely mess up your stain finish. So once you get the entire tabletop stained, make sure to go back behind it with a cloth and wipe off any excess. With oil-based stains, I like to let them sit at least 6 hours before applying the clear coat. So the clear coat that I'm using is water-based, which is another reason you need to let that stain fully dry before using the clear coat, because if you use an oil-based stain and you don't let it dry all the way, and then you go in with a water-based sealant, you're gonna get fish eyeing, it's gonna not look good. So I always like to wait at least 6 hours, but in this case, I let it sit overnight, just like I did whenever I let the top sit in the clamps. And then I used my finish sprayer, the HomeRite Super Finish Max, to spray the clear coat on. The finish that I use for this table is a satin finish. So here it looks super glossy because it's still wet. I just sprayed it, but that's how you want it to look right after you spray it. And then once it dries completely, so again, rule of thumb, 6 hours or more. Once it dries, then I like to go in with 600 grit sandpaper by hand and just wipe the whole thing down to get any of the raised grain off and get it prepared for the next layer of clear coat. After hand sanding with the 600 grit sandpaper, I like to wipe it off with a either damp cloth or a tack cloth to get all of the dust off, and then I will go in with the sprayer again and spray another coat. I do this 3 times. While the last clear coat was drying, I went ahead and added my gold tag to the base apron, which I had these custom made by Christy over at Oak Hill Millworks. If you want yours done, she's the girl to call. I've had these done for years, and they are always a perfect professional touch to the client builds that I do. Plus, if anyone is over at someone else's house and they don't want to ask, they can still see who built the table. After I attached the gold nameplate, I went ahead and got my biscuit joiner, and I cut all of the little notches that will be used for the Z-clips to attach the base to the tabletop. And in this next clip here, I will share with you why I use Z-clips. So these slots I use to attach my tabletops to the base here. And I use these, they are called Z-clips for obvious reasons. They look like the letter Z. The part without the hole goes into that slot that I just cut out, and then the part with the hole, you attach the top with a screw. Now, the reason I like attaching my tabletops this way is because boards will expand and contract widthwise. They do not expand and contract lengthwise. So allowing the tabletop to move during the changing of seasons will prevent cracking, warping, anything of that nature, because if you just secure this permanently somehow to the base, it won't be able to move during the changing of seasons, and you can wind up with a board cracking or the board warping because it wants to move. The only thing left to do is attach the top to the base, and there you have it, a completed turned leg table. If you found this video helpful in any way, or if you have any questions, please let me know in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe, and then also follow me on Instagram, where I will go over all of my builds in details in my stories, and you can follow along as I'm doing them. And if you want a black and white version of everything that I do, I've also started my own blog. It is fairly new, so it's still a baby, so I'm still adding a blog. My goal is a blog a week, so make sure to go follow that, where I link everything and share step-by-step processes in black and white with wording instead of a video, because I know sometimes a video can be a little difficult to follow. But again, thank you for watching, and I'll see you on the next project.